Hello and welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby podcast, coming to you a little bit earlier than usual this week on a Tuesday. A reminder, get in touch with us over the course of the Six Nations. Keep the questions coming in for our guests on our email channel. That's sportpodcasts@rte.ie, sportpodcasts@rte.ie. Bernard Jackman is with me in studio as usual this week. And also joining us on the line from Cardiff is Simon Thomas. Morning, Simon.
Good morning to you both. How are you?
So the plan this morning, we're going to be going light on the general review and preview that we might usually do, Bernard, because I think just for the week that was in it, leading up to a Six Nations, relatively quiet week in terms of high-profile fixtures, we kind of said it would be good, considering the controversy and chaos that's gone on in Welsh rugby over the last couple of weeks, now might be a good time to actually dig into it ahead of the Six Nations. We've kind of gallows humour while we were chatting beforehand. Part of us is wondering, this probably podcast will be out by Tuesday lunchtime. Will half the content be out of date given the amount of updates that seem to be coming? But it is a topic well worth discussing.
Yeah, and we've got the right man, Simon Thomas, who's seen it all in Welsh rugby to go through it with us. It's sad really to see what's happening over there, and well, from my point of view, just looks like a real lack of leadership and leaks and misinformation and delays in terms of strategic plans coming out, reviews taking a long time to come out, and a lot of uncertainty. And I feel for Steve Tandy. He announced his squad last week, and I think the first thing he said, can we talk about the rugby or something along those lines? So it must be very difficult for him, new man in the job, relatively new man in the job, and all this, the foundations underneath him not looking too solid. Now, to be fair, on the field, I thought the Ospreys put in a brilliant performance. Dragons, very unlucky not to win in Munster. Scarlets beat Ulster. So fair play to those professional rugby players. And also, you could say, it's only an Ospreys issue. It's not really, because the best Ospreys players will get taken into the other three regions. So for everybody in Welsh rugby, certainty of your future is less clear than it should be. So, fascinated to hear from Simon around what the latest is.
Yeah, before we bring in Simon, I'll just give the background of the last week, or even before last week, because it would have been confirmed some months ago that the Welsh Rugby Union would be culling their professional programme from 4 teams to 3 in a bid to make things more financially viable. So that would mean one of Cardiff, Dragons, Ospreys or Scarlets would be disbanded or amalgamated with another. So last year, obviously, Cardiff went into administration as well, which complicated things and taken under the control of the WRU. Last week, then, it emerged that Y11 Sports and Media, who are the group that currently own the Ospreys, they were the preferred bidders of the Welsh Rugby Union to become the new owners of Cardiff. That's now going forward. Y11 will take over Cardiff and control both until the end of next season. The Ospreys have been given assurances until the end of that 2026-27 season, after which it looks like they will be the team, it looks like anyway, who are forced to fold. There was a walkout from Ospreys players when they were told about the news last week. There were suggestions of possible strike action until recent days, when the Welsh Rugby Players Association rode back after they got more clarity on the issue. Excuse me. And then, to cap it all off, as Bernard said at the weekend, the Ospreys got a hard-earned draw against the Lions. The Scarlets pulled off a dramatic win against Ulster in the final play of the game. Cardiff beat Benetton, and the Dragons came within a whisper of winning away to Munster. Simon, there's a lot in that. It is hard to know where to begin.
That's a very good summary. I think you've done my job for me. I can go now.
You need to bring us right into the weeds on this.
I was trying to think this morning before coming on to try and put this in some kind of historical context. And I mean, I've been doing this job now since the late 80s, 35, 36 years. And I've seen lots of ups and downs, lots of crises along the way, and lots of criticism of the union during that period. But I don't think I have ever known a period where the reaction towards the actions of the Welsh Rugby Union have been so overwhelmingly negative. And there's lots of things you can pick into that, but just the one to think about, inside the last 12 months, the Welsh Rugby Union's preferred number of professional teams for Wales has been 4, then 2, then 3. Now, you just hear that, and that doesn't sound like fantastic leadership or clarity about the way forward. That's just a part of it. But I mean, the part you talked about from last week, bringing it right up to date. I mean, what they achieved there, the Welsh Rugby Union, with that announcement, was that they succeeded in totally alienating not one, but two sets of fans. You've obviously got the Ospreys fans deeply concerned about their long-term future, given there's no guarantee beyond next season, deeply concerned about the actions of Y11 in seeking to buy Cardiff. And Cardiff fans similarly are concerned about being taken over by new owners whose actions could be perceived as leading to the demise of another team. That doesn't fill you with trust and security and assurance, does it? So those are some of the feelings that are going around. But yeah, it's pretty toxic. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of upset. And it's also got very political. We've had councillors and MPs wading in with their criticisms and calling for sureties over the future of the Ospreys. And I suppose the thing to remember more than anything is that you're talking about people's livelihoods here. These are people's jobs, and they've been facing uncertainty over their futures for so long across all four professional clubs, but specifically so the Ospreys. And you really do feel for those people, because you're still living in a situation where you're not sure what's going to happen beyond the end of next season. And it just feels like a bit of a slow, drawn-out torture, and not a situation you'd want to be in at all.
Before I bring you in, Bernard, on this, we might actually just hear from Dowie Lake. As I said, I was speaking to him at the Six Nations launch in Edinburgh yesterday, and we have a clip here we can play from him. I essentially just asked him about another Six Nations build-up that's been dominated by off-field issues in Wales.
Yeah, obviously the news has been tough to take. I think it's probably something we're used to now, which sounds unfortunate. But you know, going into the campaign with some off-field stuff, I think probably affects everyone involved in the camp. So, if anything, coming a bit of positivity out of the negative is hopefully it brings us closer together as a group, and just invites us to support each other and to share experiences in the off-field things at the minute. I think, you know, there's a real opportunity for us to grow tighter from this as well.
In terms of the Ospreys and the actual on-field stuff, how proud have you been of the way the team itself and the other regions as well have kind of stuck together as playing groups over the season?
Yeah, I think the probably the biggest surprise I had was the support on social media from fans of the other Welsh regions. I know when it gets to like derby days and things like that, is a lot of you know, back and forth between like Osprey Scarlets or Blues supporters. But I think in a time like this, it's just brought everyone together, and everybody is supporting everyone else's clubs or offering their support to fans and to players. I think the fight that the boys showed over the weekend, from an Ospreys point of view against the Lions, after the week that we had and probably the compromised training week that we had, to be able to go and put that performance on the field was something I was massively proud of the boys for doing. But I think Welsh Rugby in general probably had one of its best weekends in terms of the club game in a long time. This weekend, Dragons getting close to Munster, Scarlets beating Ulster, and Cardiff winning against Benetton as well. So I think, you know, in terms of results across a whole league standpoint, I think it was a very good weekend off the back of what was probably a tough week for a lot of people in Welsh Rugby.
That was Dowie Lake, their Wales captain, speaking at the Six Nations launch in Edinburgh yesterday. Bernard, one of the things Simon mentioned in his summary of the situation, it's the jobs at stake is such a huge thing for the players, because the average rugby player isn't necessarily an incredibly well-paid position, and it's a short career as well. If you have, regardless of what team it is going to be that is getting culled in next year, the year after, or whenever it is, it's 4 teams becomes 3. It's a quarter less of the jobs available.
Yeah, it's very tough, and there's a lot of players in Welsh Rugby who aren't highly paid, you know, compared to the average across, you know, France or even the Premiership. And you've seen the best ones get handpicked, so Dowie Lake, Jack Morgan, Aaron Wainwright, etc. They've secured their future. They're going to move into the Premiership, but there's a lot of players there who won't pick up contracts. I mean, the difficulty now of getting into the Pro D2, like George North are playing in Pro D2. Ross Moriarty was there, so only the top end players in Wales will find, I suppose, employment elsewhere, and that's pretty hard. And also some of those young players have potential to be top players, but they won't necessarily get the game time or the opportunity. So if you're Steve Tandy, look at just compare with Ireland quickly. Like, we're talking about having a lack of player depth, player pool, and we have four provinces. It'll be the exact same for Steve Tandy or his successor or their successor in time. Picking from three, and I just think I think I'd like to get Simon to just give us some more detail on this, because I think this is something that maybe Irish rugby fans aren't aware of. It's not like the RFU closing down Connacht or Munster, Ulster, Leinster, in that it's fully owned. The Welsh regions, so the Dragons are now back in private ownership. They were WRU owned, they're back in private ownership. The Scarlets have a consortium. The Ospreys, if you remember, it was 3 or 4 years ago during the Six Nations, there was a big talk of a merger, right?
Yeah, 2019.
2019, yeah. So, geez, that was fine. 2019. But then my understanding is that Y11 came in, Simon, and my understanding was that they were looking at St. Helens. They were all the talk was around a real long-term project there. And then obviously Cardiff going into administration. I don't think any of us ever thought Cardiff wouldn't survive. But effectively what you've had here, it's like Worcester, London Irish or Wasp going under because their ownership decide that they'd rather have
They'd rather have a shinier toy.
A shinier toy. So if Simon, you could explain, and also effectively there's a tender process, my understanding is, to get new ownership of Cardiff. And where we are at the moment is, and please clarify if I'm wrong here, is that Y11, the people who currently own Ospreys, have been given exclusive rights for a period to close that deal. And obviously then the repercussions for that is effectively, if Y11 get Cardiff and you're not allowed to own two teams, is effectively that makes Osprey go out of business, or Ospreys have to find a new owner?
I mean, it's interesting. I think worth putting a bit of historical context on it, in that in the last 8 years, something like that, there's been 3 previous occasions where there's been talk about a possible merger from the Ospreys' perspective. This is what their fans have had to deal with. There was talk of a merger with the Scarlets, as you touched upon. There was talk of a merger with Cardiff previously. There was even talk of some kind of merger with Ealing. So there's been this concern and sort of uncertainty for Ospreys fans for a long time. And you're right to say that when the discussions started to be coming open about the potential move to St. Helens, it was seen as kind of a chance for a new start, because you know yourself, the old Liberty Stadium, which Swansea City used, which was the home for the Ospreys, great stadium, but it's like 20,000 plus. And for a rugby match where you maybe got 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, you're rattling around in there a bit. And it has that classic feel of a football stadium being used for rugby, if you know what I mean. And that was seen as being part of the issue in terms of the crowd numbers. So the view was moving to St. Helens, the old historic home of Swansea Rugby Club. That would be a way forward, and there were plans on the table for a redevelopment. So it seemed as if there was some future for there. But obviously, events have changed since then. You rightly touched on the administration. Cardiff went into temporary administration just after the Six Nations last year. But prior to that, it's important to recall that, as I said earlier, the WRU had on the table a proposal for the future structure of the professional club game in Wales. It would be 4 teams. There were clear plans. It was around £26 million per year was the target in terms of the funding for it. They had put new contracts on the table, PRA 25 it was called. That was going to be taking the 4 teams forward. And then Cardiff went into temporary administration and everything kind of changed. Those contracts hadn't been signed. The Ospreys and the Scarlets raised concerns because the Welsh Rugby Union had taken over ownership of Cardiff. and the concerns they wanted some kind of assurances and guarantees. Was the funding going to be even moving forward, given that the union would be owning one of the teams? So they declined to sign those new contracts. That kind of rumbled on. The Welsh Rugby Union put like a deadline in place for the signing, and that didn't happen. And then things started to go very, very different direction, where you had the union saying, well, we're not any longer able to guarantee equal funding for 4 sides. You had the situation with the Dragons that actually signed the contract. Cardiff had, obviously, because essentially they're owned by the union, but the 2 West Wales teams hadn't. And that really, it started rumbled from there. So on the back of the fact that the contracts weren't signed, the union went to say, well, we're going to look at the whole structure now and we're going to consider everything. They went away. And then June time, I think it was, they come out and the plan is for 2 teams. One in, essentially the impression we got was one based in Cardiff, one in Swansea. I mean, the reaction to that was absolutely nuclear. I mean, every single stakeholder and person involved in the game in Wales, apart from the union executive, was opposed to it. The players were opposed, coaches were opposed, fans were opposed. I think, I don't think the competitions would have been keen either, and broadcasters. That they went out to consultation. The reaction was so negative in terms of going to 2. We come back then, and then it's up to 3. So the goalposts have kept on moving, and all the time, the people whose livelihoods is the professional club game have left. Well, am I going to have a job? What's going to happen? The most recent development then, as Bernard rightly says, there's been the process of the Welsh Rugby Union looking for new independent owners at Cardiff. There were two bids, we were told. One was publicly known to be headed by Martin Ryan, a long-time sort of board member, director of Cardiff, respected figure, known very much within the Cardiff rugby scene. And he put together a consortium involving some producers from Hollywood, almost had the feel of the Wrexham situation, if you recall, in football there. So that was on the table. We were never told who the other bidder was, but the speculation, the whisper was that it was Y11, the owners of the Ospreys. And eventually, it even took an announcement that one of the 2 bidders had got the deal, but we didn't initially say it was Y11. Then the news breaks it was Y11, as eventually confirmed by the union. And that is the grave concern, is what that will now mean for the Ospreys, because the perception people have is, and this is important, the perception people have is that the easiest way for the Welsh Rugby Union to get down to 3 was always for one of the other teams to buy Cardiff. And the view and what people see as happening is that will be achieved. Y11 will buy Cardiff. They will own 2 teams for the next 18 months. I think they'll get permission to do that in the short term. And then the fear of all Ospreys fans is that 2 will become 1. The Ospreys will be wound down, and that will be the end of them. And just what it'll mean for the team that they still own. Obviously, will there be some attempt to create a Cardiff Ospreys? You can't see that going down very well with anybody. Mm-hmm. Would there be some plan to try and play some games in Swansea? It seems unlikely. The view Ospreys fans have generally is it'll just end up with the Ospreys disappearing and Y11 owning one club, which will be called Cardiff, and play in blue and black. So that's the fear and that's the concern. And the view is generally that it was easier for the union to achieve this than the other option, which Bernard correctly referenced, which was potentially going to a tender system where you'd say, right, we've got 3 places, 3 franchises, if you want to use that horrible word. And we've got 4 teams now, so you can now tender for one of those positions, and we'll decide which of the existing 4. In a way, that would at least, have been a more open and honest and fair thing to go through that process. But that would probably take an extensive period of time, 6 months and more. And also, when you've got 4 going down to 3 and 4 wanting to continue, you do have the potential of some kind of legal action. And I think potentially over the fact that when Cardiff went into temporary administration, you could potentially argue that, well, that was it. You should have just had the other 3 continuing, if we're understanding the way the policy is. So it's always been seen that this is the easiest way for the union to get down to 3. but there's a really bad feeling in a lot of people's mouths about the way it's been done. And there's a lot of bitterness, a lot of upset, and the feelings towards the union right now are very, very negative.
Simon, normally, unfortunately, in professional rugby, the owners tend to have a close connection to their club that they write a check for. And so, like, I know some of the people involved in the Scarlets, obviously the Dragons, David Butchers and co. Cardiff previously have had people who've, I suppose, been incredibly passionate about Cardiff under the Blues name, and now obviously back in Cardiff, and we're willing to sign checks for that. But Y11, I'm not really sure. I know a lot about them, obviously. Like, what's their play here? Do they see money in professional rugby in Wales? Are they looking at Ospreys as a commercial entity, Cardiff as a commercial entity, and saying, obviously Cardiff, capital city, a good stand as part of the WRU, maybe cheaper rent, etc. What are they in this for?
Well, you make a good point about the people who've had skin in the trade, as it were, and put money in. You take Peter Thomas, the late Peter Thomas, who was chairman of Cardiff for more than 20 years. He put 14 million pounds into Cardiff. Just extraordinary figure. I've always maintained that the only way to start to make a small fortune in Welsh rugby is to start with a big fortune, because it's very hard to make money. What do Y11 see in it? I mean, I'm guessing they would perhaps see owning Cardiff as a potentially more financially beneficial thing to do. But then what are they actually buying? This is the other thing, because they're not buying the stadium, the Arms Park. That is owned by the Cardiff Athletic Club. And over the years, which Cardiff Athletic Club, to explain to people, is a group of sporting organisations, bowls, tennis, rugby, etc., different sections. So they own the Arms Park. And what has happened is that they have always leased the ground to Cardiff Rugby Club, and they've played there. Obviously, now the union have that relationship now. So obviously, moving forward, Y11 will have to do that as well. As to who they are, we don't. I used to speak to Peter Thomas on a regular basis. You'd know yourself, Bernard. You're Tony Brown at the Dragon, Newport and the Dragons. And these people, essentially, the word is the correct word. They were benefactors. And they did it because they had an affinity with the club. Now there is a slightly faceless aspect to Y11, and overseas based. We don't see interviews with them hardly at all. So there is concern from Cardiff, but just what are the intentions? And I do go back to the point that it is very hard to make money through owning a team in Wales. So I'd be very intrigued just to see what their business plan is.
Just two questions for me, Simon. Sorry, is the writing on the wall? You think that the Ospreys are gone, or you'll definitely go to three? And then secondly, is there any bright shoots, green shoots, in terms of the national side for the Six Nations? Like, it must be so hard to. The public seem to not vote with their feet, not buying tickets. Even the Principality mightn't be a cauldron, the Six Nations.
I mean, certainly Ospreys fans are fearful that their team will not exist up to the end of the next season. And, so I suppose you listen to that as much as anything. I would be deeply, deeply saddened to see it. And I think back, Bernard, some of my, most happiest memories really sort of covering domestic Welsh rugby is covering the success of the Ospreys. And it's important to remember they have been the most successful team of the regional era. Twice they won the Pro 12 by beating Leinster in Dublin. Both tremendous nights for the club. Remember also when they won the Anglo-Welsh Cup in Twickenham, first Welsh team to do it, beating Leicester. So, great memories, great achievements. I'd be hugely saddened to see them go. Not only the achievements, but just look at the litany of players that they produced for the Wales team. Gatland's first game in charge of Wales, Bernard, 2008. There were 13 Ospreys in the team when they beat England at Twickenham. So they've contributed so much in such a productive area. And the grave concern I have is, is if that team disappears, you've got a whole area from sort of essentially from Cardiff to Llanelli, that whole Swansea area without a professional rugby club there. And what does that mean? And what does that do in terms of the aspirations and ambitions of youngsters coming through in that area? not just in terms of having a team to go to, but having the heroes to watch in the weekend, not to aspire to be like. So it saddens me hugely. I understand this could be another show again. I understand the arguments in terms of, do we have enough resource player-wise and finance-wise to sustain 4 teams? But I go back, I did an interview with Gareth Davis, him well, Bernard, the former Welsh Rugby Union chairman. And he made the point that in the early 1990s, he wondered whether Wales would ever win a game again. In 1991, Wales were whitewashed in the Five Nations, at 60-plus points put them by Australia down under when there was a ruckus in the post-match function. They were, arguing with each other. And then in the autumn of 91, they went out in the group stage of the World Cup, which they were hosting, losing to Western Samoa. And the old classic liner, but just as well, they weren't playing the whole of Samoa. So 1991 was as bad a year as I've ever known. And he missed the point that, we thought then, that's it, we've had it. And yet you then went through a period from 2005 to 2019. We had 4 Grand Slams, 5 Six Nations titles, 2 World Cup semi-finals. So his point was that these things are cyclical. They do change. Things go up and down. And the phrase he used to me when I asked him for his view about cutting to 3, he saw it as knee-jerk defeatism. And when someone of that gravitas and that standing says that, I think people need to listen to it.
Yeah.
In terms of the Six Nations, it's very, very difficult, very, very hard. How to focus, how to get the players together. And the other thing you have to understand is you only have to go on the WRU ticket website and see the swathes, the thousands and thousands of tickets that are still unsold for the 3 home games. And that's a big concern, short term and long term, because that then reduces the income stream. So wherever you look, there are grave concerns.
Yeah, it's ironic. We just come back from this weekend, being down in Galway, the opening of a new stand, a new stadium, and it's 2003. People had to march on the RFU. The RFU felt at the time there wasn't money for 4, and you've now with more British and Irish Lions from Connacht this year than from Wales, and there's a host of youngsters who are coming through, who are Connacht through and through. There's players like Billy Bohan, who's got his opportunity to go into the Irish squad this week because probably there was no opportunity for him in Leinster. So it might look like there's only one option, which is to reduce. But if you can find a way of investing in the 4 properly, I think long term people will benefit from that decision. And unfortunately for Wales as well, just my experience of it is it's not logical. Like when Gatland was winning all those trophies and getting to World Cup semi-finals, underneath wasn't aligned or there wasn't collaboration, but Wales were able to find a way to get it done. And hopefully this seems a little bit worse this time, because obviously you don't have those generational players that he had, but hopefully Wales can find a way through it and rise again.
I might jump in, Simon, with a question here, and it might be a silly question, but as you've referenced a handful of times already in this conversation, it went from 4 to 2 to 3. The Welsh Rugby Union have been known to make a lot of knee-jerk reactions. There have been a lot of flip-flopping. What's the possibility that this outcry and this outrage makes them change their mind and they decide, you know what, if the Ospreys can find a viable owner, we might go back to 4?
I mean, they've already written out a huge amount of criticism, so it doesn't seem to be changing the policy at the moment, their stance. I think one thing that could increasingly impact things is if the political outcry grows momentum. It is worth recognising that we have the elections for the Welsh government, the Senedd, the Assembly this year.
Oh, good fun.
So you can see that, particularly in the Swansea area, becoming a political hot potato. Swansea Council, you'll have seen, have already expressed their grave concern because they were going to be involved, obviously, in the redevelopment of St Helens. And they've now been making statements saying that following their meetings with the union and so forth, that they've come away without any sort of confidence about the long-term future. They haven't heard anything that's given them confidence, and the Swansea Council, and they're very, very concerned. You've had MPs making strong statements and questioning what's going on. I remember the Swansea Evening Post, Bernard, this week at the headline stitch up on the front page, not the back page, you know. So once those things tend to happen, you get momentum. And also in the background, there's a talk of an EGM, an extraordinary general meeting, where 2 of the items on the agenda will be vote of no confidence in both the WRU chairman and the Professional Rugby Board chairman. Now, we're told that the group that is sort of behind the potential EGM have enough clubs to sign the mandate for that to go ahead, but they are saying they won't do it, they won't trigger it until after the Six Nations to avoid sort of distraction for the players. Obviously, the concern there is by then it might be too late in terms of the ownership having gone through and it's a fait accompli. But I do go back to what Bernard said about Connacht. I remember 2003, I went to cover Pontypridd versus Connacht in Athlone, at the Buccaneers Club, I think it was.
That's right.
And it was all going on at that period, where, as you say, Connacht were faced with extinction. And it was coinciding, actually, with Pontypridd's status as a top-flight professional club was in doubt, because you're on the verge of going to regional rugby, you know. 23 years on now, Connacht, as you say, are thriving and just opened the clan stand. So it does show that fight and marching and opposition and standing up and, you know, saying, no, we're not going anywhere, we want to stay, it can have an impact. It's just whether the union now are set on a course, having achieved the way, as I said earlier, having achieved the way that would lead easiest to getting down to 3, whether they're now set on a course that they refuse to back down on. Because they are, as I said, the reaction has already been absolutely furious. Yeah, there's been no backing down yet. So they do. It does seem that they seem intent to going ahead with this 3-team plan.
Well, I'm sure there's a hell of a lot more news to come out on it over the next few months, and even up as far as this, next summer, when we find out ultimately what will happen with the Ospreys and Welsh Rugby. We're going to move things on. Simon, you're going to stick with us though while we move on to some Ireland news and a quick little URC recap, particularly around that opening of the new and improved XCOM Stadium. But on the Ireland squad, plenty of movement in the Ireland squad since we spoke about it last Wednesday after the announcement. Cormac Izuchukwu is now back in. Tom Ahern is out, unfortunately. He had a neck injury which hasn't fully healed. Rob Balakoon picked up a knock at the weekend. He's going to stay with the squad in Portugal this week and get that checked out. The big news, though, unfortunately, Jack Boyle, as expected, will need surgery on that Achilles injury he suffered in Saturday's Leinster win against Connacht. Andy Farrell has called up Billy Bohan in his place. Here's what the Ireland coach had to say at the Six Nations launch yesterday about all that.
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, devastating for Jack there. I mean, what a terrible thing to happen for him. As in, he would have been disappointed in the autumn not to play. He's gone back and proved a point, and that's the type of response that you want to see. And he would have known that his chance was coming around at international level. You would have thought, and for him to at the last hurdle to be pulled like that is a shame for us all.
On the flip side of the injury stuff, you have the opportunity to be able to call up a 20-year-old lad like Billy Bohan. How, as a head coach, how special is that of a moment to be able to deliver that news to a player?
Well, it is. He's 100% special, and you could hear the excitement in his voice, a little bit of a chuckle whilst I was speaking to him on the phone. But I mean, it says a lot, doesn't it, that Connacht are playing one of the biggest games in their history there, I would have thought, with the new stand opening against Leinster, and his first choice there. So he says a lot, and there's some good experienced players that are behind him last weekend. So we obviously followed his progress through the 20s and the games that he's played so far at Connacht. The temperaments there, he's come from good stock, as we know with his grandfather there. So, but he's a student of the game as well. So maybe he's come a little bit earlier than he would have thought, but that could stand to us all down the line as well.
Bernard, obviously it goes without saying that losing your first 3 choice loosehead props is not it's categorically not a good thing. And 2 of those are going to be long-term injuries for Jack Boyle and Paddy McCarthy, it looks like. But you can also strip this back and look at it as a good news story. Billy Bohan turned 20 in November, made his Connacht debut in December. He's played 5 times for the province only. He was playing Division 2A rugby in the All-Ireland League with Corinthians as recently as November. This is just it is a fantastic story. I know it puts Ireland under an enormous amount of pressure going to Paris, but ultimately it's a remarkable achievement.
Yeah, it's a credible story, and it I suppose reinforces the value of having 4 teams. Like Billy Bohan came through the Leinster underage system, went to school in Newbridge, and Connacht, in fairness, have done a great job of identifying some of those players in Leinster who maybe there's no space for them in the academy, and I think Billy was probably one of those. His father was played for Leinster, good prop for Lansdowne Enda. His grandfather, that I presume that Andy's talking about, is the late Mick Doyle, the Doyler, who played for Ireland, played for British Irish Lions, captained Ireland, coached Ireland to success, Triple Crowns. And on his other side, his paternal grandfather got beaten in an All-Ireland hurling final for Dublin, played football for Kildare, and played hurling and football for Dublin and played football for Kildare. He was a cadet in the army, so he has the pedigree. He should be in Coolmore. But more importantly, I think he has the ability. I think physically he's developed over the last year. He was quite slight prop in school, and I hadn't seen him. I'd seen him on TV, but I hadn't seen him live until Saturday for about 2 months, and I couldn't believe how bulked up he is, how physically he's come into his own. And I also thought scrummaging profile wise, actually both props, Sam Elo and Billy Bohan, who are both young props, just the way they scrummaged was very similar to how John Fogarty would want the props to scrummage. They were nice and tidy, good pictures of the referee. And he was up against Bohan was up against Niall Smith, who I think is a future superstar, and he did really well. So, talk about timing. As Andy said, getting selected for that game ahead of Buckley, ahead of Dooley, was a huge statement by Stuart Lancaster. And then he plays well, and suddenly now, the way Farley's talking there, and you can nearly hear a little bit of excitement in his voice, and I wouldn't be surprised if he jumped ahead of Michael Milne and Jeremy Lockman. Now, not to start, I think they'll move Tom O'Toole across to loosehead. But I think Bohan has a bit of momentum behind him now, and it's some rise.
Yeah, it certainly is. I was checking in with our other Newbridge College correspondent, Johnny Murphy, over the weekend, trying to get more information. A ball-playing prop is what Johnny kind of, in a lengthy brief, he summed it up as that, a really impressive ball player on top of the nuts and bolts stuff. And I believe his younger brother is also a captain of the senior cup team as well this year.
He's very good younger brother as well.
Serious sporting stock in that family. Simon, can you give us the outside view of Ireland? Because I don't know how much you've been seeing of us. We've been feeling a little bit pessimistic about ourselves the last couple of months. Tell us we're great. Can you say nice things about us?
It's all relative. I have a lot of interaction with Irish fans on social media, and I hear them sort of wailing and gnashing their teeth, and then I look at the league table in the URC, and there's about 4 of them in the top 8 quite often. So it is all relative, isn't it? And I mean, I think it's fair to say that Wales have quite happily swapped the results with Ireland over the last 18 months. So there's still a huge amount of talent, isn't there? I think the outside perception has been, is it an aging team? Is that a fair comment? I think that's what people have seen. So it's interesting to hear you talking about young players coming through. But then I see the Irish teams on a regular basis covering URC games. There seems to me like a huge amount of talent there. And I just look at someone like Gavin Coombs. He came. I was watching the Dragons Munster game last weekend. Dragons, Bernard, your old team, they were winning 20 points to 7 with about 25 minutes to go. It looked like they were going to claim their first away league win since 2022. That was the scale of it. And they were playing really well. On comes Gavin Coombs. The game changes, scores 2 tries from close range. I was looking at his try scoring record for Munster, is extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And yet, for a lot of the time, he seems to be in surplus to requirements for the Ireland setup. So that to me just is one example of my perception that there is excellent strength in depth in Irish rugby.
Yeah, I think it is a fair point. I'm going to bring in an email here. Actually, this is a good one from Luke, which was a very long email, but I've taken out this final point of it to bring it to the box. It kind of ties in nicely with younger players being given a chance, and also mentions a player who I think we kind of done dirty last week by not mentioning, who missed out on the squad. He just says, lastly, it would be great to recognise one thing on the pod, as it doesn't happen often. Ian Henderson basically put himself on the chopping block, stating live on air what the entire country is thinking. Play the talent, not the centralised same local faces, all while knowing he could be the one to suffer from it. He hasn't even been mentioned in the press. Guilty as charged. We'll put our hands up on that one. Wish we had more of our senior pros do the same. Huge respect for Hendo for that. I doubt Andy Farrell punished him for the background. He kind of essentially came out a few weeks ago after Ulster beat Munster and said, we need to see more of these young Ulster players and younger players in general in the Ireland squad. There's too many old faces, is paraphrasing kind of what he said. I don't think he was dropped for saying that, but I think he's someone who has missed out because younger players like an Edwin Adogbo has been given a chance.
Yeah, I remember him saying it, and I thought, well, there's a risk to that, and it was pointed, and I thought it was brilliant to hear that. Obviously, as Ulster captain, support. I thought he was talking about a lot of the Ulster players at the time.
Yeah, but there's a wider point.
Yeah, but I'm actually now I'm surprised if he's left out of the squad. I'm surprised there wasn't more from Andy Farrell about it, because he has been an unbelievable player for Ireland. Hopefully he fights his way back in. I presumed he had a knock, and now I'm realising he wasn't named as one of those 10 players who were injured. So yeah, he has been squeezed probably by Edwin, and even Izuchuku now is back available, having not originally been in. But if that's the last we see of Henderson in an Irish squad, what a career he's had and what a stalwart he's been. I'd like to hope that he can find a way back in, even though there's a clamour for youngsters. I think Henderson on his day is still a force to be reckoned with. But yeah, it is pleasing to see some players. Farrell will argue that when they're ready, he brings them in. But there's probably a feeling in Irish rugby that it has gone a little bit stale, and a lot of the experienced campaigners haven't been playing as well as they have in the past. And I know Farrell's argument would be, well, let's see what they do when they step up back to the international arena, and we're going to find out, Thursday week in Paris. Can they, I suppose, find their old form in a green jersey? And if they don't, obviously, then I think he'll try and expedite some of those youngsters.
Andy Farrell was in quite a good mood, I would say, yesterday. Seems nice and relaxed at the Six Nations launch. He was optimistic, while at the same time recognising and acknowledging that there are a lot of things that need to be ironed out over this next week while they're in Portugal. One of the things that came up repeatedly was discipline, which we've kind of covered, but connected to that, not so much discipline in terms of giving away penalties or giving away yellow cards for high tackles, but discipline in how they interact with referees, which is something that's really cropped up in the last couple of months across the Irish provinces. We've seen it in the past with Leinster, even going back a couple of years, where like James Ryan had issues while he was captain, and Caelan Doris early in his captaincy with Ireland. Munster a couple of weeks ago, they gave away a penalty for dissent after multiple players were yapping at Matt Carley in the cast game. And last weekend then, Owen Cross clearly lost his patience with Bundyaki and Jack Harty after, far too much talking. There's a little bit too much dissent creeping in on the pitch, and it doesn't do much for an Ireland team that are already having issues with, high penalty count, high card count. Oh,
I'd say it's his biggest concern is the discipline, and you've seen a clamp down by referees on some of the things that possibly Irish teams were getting away with, at the defensive breakdown in particular, the offside line. We're right on the edge there at provincial level, not so much with Ireland. But I think what would be really worrying for Farrell is it wasn't just the inter-pros where you had Irish referees who you could say have, just had enough of this. You saw it in Europe as well, with non-Irish referees. So it seems within the refereeing fraternity that there's been a reaction to what's been constant. Like when you're commentating on games, you have a clearer audio of the ref mic than the TV viewer, and it's incredible the amount of chat from Irish players across the board, not just the captain. I also think we're probably overdoing it captaincy wise in terms of pressurizing referees to look at things
like
as well. It's non-stop.
Yeah.
But in the background, there's every ruck there's 4 or 5 Irish players in a provincial jersey shouting and telling the referee what to do. And even the one at the weekend for Connacht, which was really interesting because like Owen Cross, the referee, he warned Jack Carty and Bundy that, and you could hear by his tone, you could see by his body language that he was on the edge of saying enough's enough. He warned them, and a couple of plays later, he has to penalise Bundy for questioning the decision. And actually, in fact, the decision that Bundy was questioning was the right decision by the referee. Bundy was wrong, but it seems as if Bundy had, obviously he was frustrated not to play at the start. I think in the biggest game in Connacht's history. He's been a big part of. He nearly built that stand with his actions on the field. In some ways, in terms of driving the popularity of Connacht, leading him to a Pro 12. Actually, being a big part in a Pro 12 win in Murrayfield, but he brought that frustration onto the field, and it affected his play, I think, and he certainly was distracted. So yeah, but I think if Farrell wants to be able to show clips and give examples of this costing teams and Irish players overstepping the mark, he has an abundance of them over the last 4 weeks.
And obviously, people maybe on the outside might even point back, like there have been historical things. Mac Hansen last year and referee Chris Busby deciding to step away, maybe not specifically because of it, but not long after it. Johnny Sexton after the Champions Cup final a couple of years ago. There were high profile isolated incidents, and now there seems to be a regular occurrence of smaller stuff. Simon, are we just overanalyzing this happening in Ireland? Is this a global issue? Is it also kind of happening in Wales, where you're seeing far too much back chat and communication with referees, or is there a little bit less scrutiny going on over there?
Yeah, it brings to mind some of Nigel Owens' quips over the years. This is not soccer, wasn't it? It was one of these. I think there's a famous clip of him talking to Chris Robshaw where he just says, "Christopher," Mr. Robshaw walks away. So is respect reducing? I don't know. I mean, I watch a lot of the community club games as well, and you get the occasional thing said. Actually, you probably get more things said from the touchline there than
big time.
So yeah, I think it's creeping in a little bit more. What I notice is that there's a lot of shouting. It's quite funny, isn't it? Because it's quite polite shouting. Because it'll be offside, sir. So there'll be sort of outrage, but with politeness at the end of it. And you do get a lot of that. And I noticed at the weekend, I think Holly Davidson at one point, she was refereeing the game, and she said, "You must stop shouting at me like that." You do get quite a bit of it now, and I suppose, especially with things like the TMO reviews, I see a lot now of perhaps captains or even players shouting head contact, almost like trying to get a review of something. So it's almost like the captain's challenge has come back in without it actually existing. So that's the one thing I have noticed. A lot of sort of, impeaching to the referee to look at certain things and putting pressure on them. And I guess that is a legacy of so many things being looked at by the TMO these days.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That was very evident in both games this weekend that I was at live, the Connacht game against Leinster and the Munster game against Dragons. And actually in the Leinster game, you could hear Caelan Doris basically saying to the referee, "I've been told," or they're telling me, "You need to look at that." So it's like, and obviously if the referee's mind and you're saying, "Oh, someone's actually seen this on a laptop," so there must be something there. But he, for instance, he was really consistent. He said, "Look, trust the process." The TMO was sweeping in the background, but Doris was asking him all the time. But a couple of times he basically said, "I've been told you need to look at this," which again reinforced a little bit. And if you have a weak referee, then a weaker referee, potentially they get forced by that and they don't follow the process and they kick back to the TMO. So it's interesting. Now I think Connacht, my understanding is that there was a few head contacts missed in the Connacht-Leinster game that Connacht didn't benefit from, but I think that's part of it, isn't it?
Well, what's actually really interesting, I'm glad you actually mentioned that, the fact that there were a few questionable head contacts potentially missed. I have a really interesting theory on it. I don't know, did you notice on Saturday at the Dexcom? And that can lead us nicely into the grand opening of that. But they had a band down in that kind of makeshift TV studio down in the corner, and maybe if there was a lengthy stoppage, sometimes they would just have the band play a bit of music, and the big screens in the ground were showing them. On a couple of occasions, those stoppages occurred after the questionable tackles, and rather than seeing the replays of the tackle and the crowd getting up in arms and putting pressure on the referee, the people in the stadium were just watching the live music happening. While on my laptop in front of me, I had the stream of the match, and you could see 3 or 4 replays of a tackle that looked a little bit questionable, but there wasn't that visceral reaction from the crowd seeing the incident and putting the pressure on the referee to react.
Yeah, and likewise the TMO. Like the TMO's in the truck, TV truck, and I'm not saying he gets influenced by, or he or she gets influenced by the crowd, but certainly sometimes it can alert them to something that they've missed if they hear a roar when the crowd are seeing a replay. So I hadn't. I hadn't realised that's why the crowd weren't looking at the replays, but certainly there will be stuff missed, and unfortunately at the moment I think there's too much pressure on from players to referees to look back at things, and we're trying to speed the game up, you know. And even I thought that the TMO decision to rule out the Shea Hope try, I don't know if TMO should be going back for something as marginal as that, you know. And even with the video evidence, it was still quite, you could argue the case that it actually wasn't a ruck. The knee barely touched the ground. So, yeah, I think they just need to tighten in on what TMOs are looking for. And because that was a great try, traditional try. All the things they're trying to actually create more of in the game. Like, people wonder why the escort rule was taken out. It was to create transitional attack. So a turnover like that, a strip tackle, does create space and opportunity. And yeah, I know, speaking to Philo TT afterwards, and speaking to lots of coaches, no one is overly comfortable around the officiating at the moment. But we need to work together. It's not players and coaches and supporters against officials. It's working together to try and get back to making sure the game is safe, but also that the game flows in a correct way.
I do wonder.
Bernard, I was just going to say, Bernard, on that one, the Shea Hope try you've referenced there, a couple of people sort of went back and looked at that, and the explanation, it was Dermot Barron, hooker. Hooker was in a contact situation, and Harry Beddle, the Dragons flanker, who I'll point out went to the bin and still made 33 tackles in that game. So watch out for that young man. He pulled a rip off, and Dermot Barron, the Dragon, moved it, and Shea Hope scored. And they went back to the incident, and we found that Dermot Barron's knee had briefly touched the ground a split second before Beryl ripped the ball. Someone actually timed it. It was 0.2 seconds. Yeah. So that's how forensic things have got now. And is that a good thing? I don't know. I mean, it was a great try, but it's gotten to the point now. How far back do you go? Because we've always said, and rugby is a game, you can find an offence in every single ruck if you want to. Let's just go back to the kickoff and find a thing there. You do worry that it's just becoming overly forensic in the way it's administered, but I suppose it's like the VAR in football a bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it went down like a lead balloon at the time. I'd be interested to have another look at the Captain's Challenge trial from a few years ago. Just say, you know what, each team you get 2 or 3 checks each. That's your lot. Use them if you want to. Don't use them if you don't want to.
I'd only give them one. I'll give them one, and
if it's successful, you keep it.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop the game. Effectively, it just means the TMO has to sweep on that particular incident in the background. Yeah, but the game continues. It's only stopped if it's actually found to be a legitimate call. Yeah,
so I know it wasn't popular at the time. I'd be interested to have another look. Very quickly, we are running out of time, Bernard. Overall thoughts on the new and improved XCOM Stadium, specifically the Clan Stand. You were over on the TV side, so you actually got to look at it. I had the pleasure of being in it, but I was still kind of looking at the old sports ground out in front of me.
From the other side.
But it was a lovely view, I have to say.
Yeah, no,
and great facilities.
It's top notch, and I hate 4G pitches, but the fact that is a 4G pitch, and every young boy and girl who plays rugby in Connacht will get a chance to play on that field, you know, during their underage career, somewhere along the line, play in front of that stand. The back office facilities are top class. The training facilities now for Connacht, the indoor barn, you know, and it's coming at a time when this has already started. You're not now saying, oh, now we have a stand, we can actually develop homegrown players. There's a splatter of very talented homegrown players already in the Connacht Academy. And speaking to Mervyn Murphy, the former Irish analyst who now works in the pathways, he said there's 14 and 15-year-olds down there at the moment that he's never seen the likes of them. You know, in terms of coming through Connacht, they've always traditionally been coming from Leinster. So it's great to see the capital investment, and all Stuart Lancaster needs now is a €1 million, I think, to go sign some players for next year and get the squad that can go toe to toe for even longer with Leinster. As I thought, it was a good performance by Connacht, but they ran out of juice the last 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even on the wider facilities now at the stadium. I was talking to JP Cooney there on Saturday. He was telling a few of us some tales about even the state of the facilities going back 10, 12 years. Just like the simple training stuff. It was remarkable to see how far they've come. One last question. This is from Gary on YouTube, and this can be a short one. It's for you, Bernard. I'd like to hear the 20-second update on Bernard's own training, playing, injury details. What are you benching these days, Bernard? As a retired player, how are you keeping on top of the old niggles you've had in your career? I haven't played in tight head in 20 years, he says, and I'm still dealing with left side issues.
The only benching I'm doing is sitting at a bench. having a chicken roll. No, I've actually got into sauna and plunge pools, but I'm not doing near enough. And hearing John Hayes the other day,
it's
John
quite
Hayes,
relevant now.
Yeah, relevant. Yeah, he's an 8 of his movement in his neck, and luckily his wife Fiona's a physio, so he's getting relief there. But no, I wouldn't. I could do a lot more. I need to do a lot more, but I wouldn't change for the world. I miss playing so much, and not playing professionally, just playing the game. Was the game was unbelievably good to me.
Good stuff. Well, get more of those questions into us. A reminder, the emails sportpodcasts@rte.ie. That's where you'll find us. Bernard, thanks as always. Simon, thank you very much for joining us. You gave us great insight to everything that's happening in Wales, and I'm sure it's not the last time we're probably going to be speaking to you about this as well. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Simon. Look after yourself.
My pleasure, no problem.
We'll speak to you again next week. Expect a Tuesday pod next week, by the way. We'll be reacting to the team news from Paris ahead of Ireland against France in the Six Nations. Speak to you then.